The Catherian ambassador Veltar stood before the assembled Council of Worlds, her crystalline form trembling with barely contained desperation. The great hall, carved from living coral that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, had never witnessed such raw emotion from the typically stoic Catherians. Representatives from dozens of species watched in uncomfortable silence as she struggled to maintain her composure. "Honored delegates," Veltar began, her voice creating harmonic resonances that spoke of her people's musical language, "we come before you not as proud members of the galactic community, but as refugees fleeing annihilation." The translation matrix embedded in the chamber's walls converted her melodic tones into the various languages of the assembled species, but no technology could translate the despair that colored every note. The Vorthak swarm had swept through the Outer Rim territories like a plague of living metal. These biomechanical nightmares consumed everything in their path, converting organic matter into more of their kind, while strip mining entire worlds for the rare minerals that powered their reproduction cycles. What made them truly terrifying was their intelligence. They learned, adapted, and evolved with each world they devoured. Elder Zeftos of the Altarian Collective leaned forward in his floating meditation pod, his forearms weaving complex patterns of concern. "The defense fleets of the Outer Rim were among our finest," he stated, his telepathic communication rippling through the chamber like cool water. "If the combined might of 12 species cannot stand against this threat, what hope do we have?" Veltar's form flickered, the crystal matrices that comprised her body refracting light in patterns that spoke of anguish. "The swarm does not simply destroy, Honored Elder. It learns. Every weapon we deploy, every tactic we employ, they adapt to counter within hours. Our plasma cannons became useless when they developed energy-absorbing carapaces. Our quantum missiles were turned against us when they learned to redirect the quantum fields. Even our most advanced AI warfare systems were corrupted and turned to serve their hive mind." Commander Thos of the Draknari military caste, his reptilian features scarred from countless battles, slammed a clawed fist against his delegation's podium. "Then we fight with everything we have. Every fleet, every soldier, every world united against this threat." "You do not understand." Veltar's harmonics took on a note of profound sadness. "The swarm grows stronger with every victory. Each ship they destroy, each world they consume, adds to their knowledge and their numbers. We estimate they have increased their fleet strength by 300% since beginning their assault on the Outer Rim." The chamber erupted in worried chatter across multiple communication methods. Telepathic waves crashed against empathic emanations, while verbal arguments broke out among species that preferred auditory communication. The chaos was interrupted by the ancient voice of Primus Korthul, the eldest member of the council and representative of the first civilization. "Peace," the crystalline entity intoned, its form shifting through colors that predated most galactic languages. "In my 7,000 years I have seen the rise and fall of empires, witnessed the birth of new species and the extinction of others. This swarm represents something different, a force that grows stronger through conflict itself." The ancient being paused, its form cycling through deep purples and blues of contemplation. "Traditional warfare will not suffice. We need assistance from those who understand warfare in ways we do not." It was then that junior diplomat Cassira of the Helian Trade Federation spoke up, her feathered crest rising with nervous energy. She was young for a diplomatic position, having achieved her rank through exceptional xenobiology studies rather than political maneuvering. "There is one species that might possess the unconventional thinking we require," she said hesitantly. The chamber fell silent. Even the bioluminescent coral seemed to dim its pulsing as all attention focused on the young diplomat. Elder Zeftos projected gentle encouragement through his telepathic field. Speak freely, young one. Desperate times call for unconventional solutions. Kesira's feathers ruffled as she accessed her datapad, calling up files that made several delegates recoil in surprise. "The humans of Earth," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Their homeworld is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, one of the most hostile planets known to support intelligent life. The species that evolved there developed characteristics that most of the galaxy finds disturbing." Holographic displays throughout the chamber lit up with data about humanity. Images of their world showed vast oceans during storm seasons, with waves that could swallow small spacecraft, continental masses racked by seismic activity that would flatten most galactic cities, weather patterns that included frozen precipitation capable of collapsing structures, and electromagnetic storms that could disable unshielded technology. "They are pack hunters by evolution," Kesira continued, warming to her subject. "Their ancestors survived by cooperative hunting of megafauna that outweighed them by factors of 10 or more. They developed endurance capabilities that allow them to pursue prey across vast distances until their targets collapsed from exhaustion. Their innovation rate is unprecedented. They have advanced from primitive tool use to space travel in a time span that most species would consider impossible." Commander Thoss studied the rotating hologram of a human with professional interest. "They appear physically unimpressive. Their natural weapons are minimal, their sensory organs limited compared to most species. What makes them particularly suited for this crisis?" The young diplomat's crest flattened against her skull as she accessed more disturbing data. "Their psychological profile, Commander. Humans demonstrate a unique trait they call spite, the willingness to accept personal cost in order to inflict greater cost upon an opponent. They also exhibit something they term stubbornness, a refusal to accept defeat even when logic suggests surrender would minimize casualties." More concerning data scrolled across the displays. Humans had a documented history of fighting wars that lasted for decades, sometimes centuries. They had fought conflicts in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Desert wars where the temperature fluctuations alone would be lethal to most life forms. Arctic campaigns where the cold could freeze carbon dioxide solid. Underwater combat in crushing depths that would implode conventional spacecraft. "Most disturbing," Kesira said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is their technological approach. When faced with problems, humans do not seek elegant solutions. They seek solutions that work, regardless of complexity, danger, or cost. They have been known to deliberately damage their own equipment to achieve tactical advantages. They call this thinking outside the box." Veltar's crystalline form had brightened during the presentation, hope beginning to resonate in her harmonic voice. "These humans sound perfectly suited to face an adaptive enemy. Their unpredictability might be exactly what we need." Elder Zeftos projected thoughtful consideration through his telepathic field. "The logistics would be complex. Earth is located in a relatively isolated sector. Their technology is primitive by galactic standards. Even if they agreed to help, how could they reach the conflict zone in time to matter?" "That may not be an issue," Kesira said, consulting her datapad again. "Human exploratory vessels have been detected at the edges of several systems. Their faster-than-light capability is crude but functional. More concerning is their apparent disregard for safe jump protocols. They routinely attempt interstellar journeys that would be considered suicidal by any reasonable engineering standard." Primus Corthul's form shifted to colors that indicated deep contemplation. "A species that treats danger as an acceptable cost rather than an obstacle to avoid. Such thinking might indeed prove valuable against an enemy that adapts to conventional threats." The ancient being's color patterns shifted to decision-making hues. "I propose we dispatch an embassy to this Earth immediately." The vote was swift and unanimous. Even the most conservative delegates recognized that conventional solutions had failed catastrophically. If the Vorthak swarm continued its current expansion rate, it would reach the core worlds within 2 standard years. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and humanity certainly qualified as desperate. Ambassador Veltar volunteered to lead the embassy herself, driven by the knowledge that her homeworld of Kithros Prime had less than 6 months before the swarm reached their system. The fastest diplomatic vessel available was prepared for immediate departure, its crew selected from species known for their adaptability to alien environments. As the embassy ship departed the council chamber's orbital platform, none of the delegates fully understood what they had set in motion. They viewed humanity as a useful tool, a species with unconventional thinking that might provide the tactical innovation needed to defeat an adaptive enemy. They expected perhaps a few thousand volunteers, some creative weapons designs, and strategic advice from a species experienced with hostile environments. What they had actually done was issue a formal request for assistance to a species that viewed overwhelming force as the most efficient solution to any problem. A species that had turned their own homeworld's hostility into an advantage through millennia of adaptation and innovation. A species that considered acceptable losses to be any number below total extinction. The embassy ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it the hope of dozens of worlds and the desperate prayers of trillions of beings. Behind them, the council chamber's coral walls pulsed with anxious bioluminescence as delegates returned to their respective homeworlds to prepare for either salvation or annihilation. In the depths of space, the Vorthak swarm continued its inexorable advance, consuming world after world with mechanical precision. Their hive mind processed new data from each conquest, refining their strategies and strengthening their forces. They had encountered no resistance they could not eventually overcome through adaptation and superior numbers. They had never encountered humanity. The embassy ship Harmonious Dawn translated out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, its sensors immediately screaming warnings about the gravitational chaos that surrounded them. Ambassador Veltar studied the tactical display with growing concern as her crystalline form resonated with harmonics of confusion and alarm. "Honored Ambassador," reported Navigation Officer Zenthal, his insectoid mandibles clicking nervously. "The gravitational readings in this system are highly unstable. There appears to be a massive stellar body creating severe spacetime distortions." Chief Science Officer Mira Tan, her serpentine form coiled around her workstation, raised her head with obvious distress. The star-designated Sul is a Class G yellow dwarf, highly energetic and prone to electromagnetic outbursts. The radiation levels throughout this system exceed safety parameters for most known life forms. How any species could evolve in such conditions is beyond comprehension. As they drew closer to the system's primary world, the readings became more disturbing. Earth's moon was an enormous gravitational anchor, creating tidal forces that would constantly reshape any planetary surface. The planet itself spun at a rate that created weather systems of devastating intensity. Massive storm formations were visible from space, some larger than small moons. "The atmospheric composition is 21% oxygen," Miratan reported with undisguised horror. "That concentration would be considered a fire hazard on most worlds. The slightest spark could trigger combustion reactions. No wonder their development focused on survival rather than elegance." But it was the detection of artificial structures that truly shocked the embassy crew. Orbital platforms surrounded Earth in complex patterns that defied conventional engineering logic. Massive rotating habitats spun at velocities that would create crushing gravitational forces. Mining installations operated in the asteroid belt despite radiation levels that would kill most galactic species within hours. "Ambassador," Communications Officer Velnor announced, "we are receiving multiple hail signals. The communication protocols are unusual." They appear to be broadcasting on dozens of different frequencies simultaneously, and the mathematical basis for their language structure is unlike anything in our diplomatic databases. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying a human face that made several crew members recoil instinctively. The creature's eyes were positioned forward on its skull like a predator's, and its skin showed evidence of regular exposure to harmful radiation. When it spoke, its mouth revealed omnivore teeth designed for both tearing meat and grinding plant matter. "Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terra Defense Force," the human said, its voice carrying undertones that the embassy's fear response systems interpreted as aggressive. "You have entered protected space around our homeworld. State your intentions immediately or prepare to be boarded." Veltar stepped forward, allowing the translation matrix to convert her harmonic communications into human auditory language. "Greetings, Admiral Chen. I am Ambassador Veltar of the Catherian Republic, representing the Council of Worlds. We come seeking audience with your leadership regarding a crisis that threatens the galactic community." The human's facial expression shifted in ways that the crew's xenobiology databases couldn't interpret. "The Council of Worlds? That's the group that's been ignoring our first contact attempts for the past 3 years? And now you want our help?" The creature made a sound that the translator identified as laughter, though it contained no harmonics of joy that any galactic species would recognize. "Admiral, we acknowledge that previous contact protocols may have been inadequate. However, the situation has become desperate. An aggressive species known as the Vorthak Swarm is consuming worlds throughout the Outer Rim. Their adaptive capabilities have rendered conventional military responses ineffective." The human leaned forward, and Veltar noticed that its pupils dilated slightly. A physiological response that her databases suggested indicated interest or arousal. "Adaptive hostiles consuming worlds," Chen said slowly. "How long since first contact with this swarm?" "Approximately 18 standard months," Veltar replied. "They have consumed 47 inhabited worlds and show no signs of slowing their advance." The human's expression became what the crew's computers could only categorize as predatory satisfaction. 47 worlds in 18 months, and your combined fleets can't stop them. Either these swarms are incredibly powerful, or your military doctrine needs serious revision." Chen paused, manipulating controls outside the view screen's range. "Ambassador, I'm transmitting coordinates for Luna Station. You'll meet with our Xeno-Diplomacy Council there. Fair warning, our atmospheric mixture will require protective equipment for most species." As the embassy ship approached Luna Station, the crew got their first close look at human engineering. The station was built into the moon's surface rather than orbiting freely, using the natural satellite's mass as both protection and anchor point. Massive launch tubes were carved directly into the lunar rock, pointing toward deep space with obvious military intent. "The engineering is crude but effective," Miraton observed. "They have prioritized durability and firepower over elegance or efficiency. These launch systems could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed." The station's interior was even more disturbing. Corridors were wide enough to allow rapid movement of large groups, with intersection points designed for defensive purposes. The humans had built their space infrastructure with the assumption that they would eventually need to fight battles inside their own facilities. Ambassador Veltar and her reduced diplomatic team were escorted to a conference chamber that looked more like a military briefing room than a diplomatic venue. The humans who awaited them represented various physical variations of their species, but all shared the same predatory eye placement and radiation-scarred skin that marked them as products of their Deathworld environment. Secretary General Maria Santos rose from her seat as the delegation entered. "Ambassador Veltar, welcome to Luna Station. I understand you're here about something called the Vorthak Swarm." "Secretary General Santos," Veltar began, her harmonics carrying formal diplomatic protocols. We face an extinction-level threat that has proven immune to conventional military responses. The swarm adapts to any strategy we employ, learning from each encounter and becoming stronger. We require assistance from those who understand unconventional warfare. General Marcus Webb, his scarred features bearing evidence of personal combat experience, studied tactical displays that showed the swarm's expansion pattern. Adaptive hostiles, he mused. They learn from every engagement and counter future uses of the same tactics. How large are their individual units? Swarm drones range from fighter craft size to dreadnought scale, Veltar replied. Their capital ships can exceed 5 kilometers in length and carry populations in the hundreds of thousands. Webb exchanged glances with Admiral Chen, and Veltar noticed that both humans exhibited the same predatory micro-expressions. And they reproduce by consuming organic matter and mining operations? Correct. They process biological material to create new drones while strip mining worlds for the rare elements needed for their reproduction cycles. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the xenobiologist on the Human Council, leaned forward with obvious interest. A hive-mind species with industrial reproduction capabilities. How do they coordinate between distant units? Unknown, Veltar admitted. Their communication methods appear to function across interstellar distances with minimal delay. Some form of quantum entanglement is suspected, but we have been unable to verify this. Secretary General Santos stood and activated a holographic display that showed Earth's orbital infrastructure in full detail. What appeared were defensive platforms that dwarfed anything in the galactic community's arsenals, massive particle accelerators that could fire projectiles across solar system distances, fusion-powered platforms that could generate directed energy beams capable of vaporizing asteroid-sized targets. Ambassador, Santos said quietly, I need you to understand something about humanity. We don't just live on a death world. We turned our death world into a weapon. Every natural disaster, every hostile environment, every challenge our planet presented became a training ground for warfare that no other species has experienced. The holographic display shifted to show human military exercises. Soldiers training in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Combat operations conducted in crushing ocean depths, radiation-soaked asteroid fields, and the vacuum of space itself. Weapons tests that used controlled stellar radiation as ammunition. Our ancestors learned to hunt by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, General Webb continued. When faced with stronger enemies, we learned to make them come to us in environments where their strength became a disadvantage. When confronted with superior technology, we developed tactics that turned their advantages against them. Admiral Chen activated another display showing recent human innovations. We've been monitoring galactic communication since achieving spaceflight. We know about the standard tactical doctrines your species employ, and frankly, they're predictable. Energy shields, plasma weapons, guided missiles, all elegant solutions that work well against enemies who fight by the same rules. The Vorthak swarm doesn't fight by rules, Veltar protested. They adapt to counter everything we deploy against them. Exactly, Santos said, her expression shifting to something the crew's computers could only interpret as terrifying satisfaction. They adapt to elegant solutions, refined tactics, and predictable strategies. What they've never encountered is an enemy that deliberately chooses chaos over order, effectiveness over elegance, and victory over survival. Dr. Harrison called up biological data about the swarm drones. Biomechanical entities with learning capabilities, she observed. They process information and adapt based on previous encounters, but adaptation requires time and processing power. How quickly do they implement new countermeasures? Usually within 6 to 8 hours of initial contact, Veltar replied. The human scientists exchanged glances, that Veltar was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "Ambassador," Webb said slowly, "human tactical doctrine is based on rapid adaptation and overwhelming force application. We change strategies not every few days or weeks, but every few minutes. Our weapon systems are designed to be modular, unpredictable, and expendable." Santos stood and moved to a larger display that showed the current state of human military preparation. "We've been expecting a galactic war since we achieved spaceflight, not because we wanted one, but because statistically, any galaxy containing multiple intelligent species will eventually experience resource conflicts. We've spent the last century preparing for enemies we'd never seen, using weapon systems designed to counter technologies we didn't understand." The display showed massive shipyard facilities throughout the Sol system, production lines that could build warships at rates that defied galactic industrial standards. More disturbing were the weapon designs, systems that seemed to violate several galactic treaties regarding acceptable military technology. "Ambassador Veltar," Santos said formally, "the United Earth government is prepared to assist the galactic community against the Vorthak swarm. However, we have certain conditions that must be understood before we commit our forces." Veltar's crystalline form resonated with harmonics of hope mixed with apprehension. "What conditions, Secretary General?" "First, human forces will operate under human command structure. We don't integrate well with alien tactical doctrines, and our methods may disturb galactic military observers. Second," Admiral Chen continued, "we require complete tactical intelligence about the swarm's capabilities, distribution, and previous engagements. Our strategic planning depends on understanding enemy psychology and adaptation patterns." General Webb stepped forward. "Third, we need authorization to use weapons and tactics that may violate current galactic warfare conventions. The methods that will be effective against an adaptive enemy are not going to be pretty, elegant, or humane by galactic standards." Veltar's harmonics carried undertones of desperation as she realized what the humans were implying. They weren't offering to send advisors or specialized troops. They were preparing to deploy their full military capacity against the swarm, using methods that would probably horrify the galactic community almost as much as the enemy they were fighting. "How long would you require to mobilize your forces?" she asked. Santos smiled, an expression that showed teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Ambassador, we began mobilization the moment your ship entered our sensor range. The Terra Defense Force is ready to deploy immediately." The combined fleets of the galactic community hung in space above the dying world of Zerion Prime, their elegant formations maintaining perfect tactical distances while monitoring the approaching Vorthak swarm. Admiral Kethvar of the Altarian Collective watched his tactical displays with growing despair as the enemy forces demonstrated their usual adaptive superiority. "They have completely countered our plasma bombardment," his weapons officer reported, tentacles writhing with frustration. "The swarm drones have developed energy absorption matrices that actually strengthen their shields when struck by our primary weapons." Through the bridge's telepathic communication grid, Kethvar could feel the collective anxiety of his fellow commanders. The Draknari warships had exhausted their missile supplies against enemies that learned to redirect projectile guidance systems. The Helian energy platforms were useless against foes that converted directed energy attacks into power sources. Every weapon system in the galactic arsenal had been analyzed, adapted to, and rendered ineffective. "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we are receiving a transmission from the edge of the system. It's the human fleet." Kethvar's four arms moved in patterns of confused anticipation. The humans had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach the combat zone, and intelligence reports suggested they were bringing a small task force of primitive vessels. "Put them through." The main view screen activated to show Admiral Sarah Chen, her scarred features displaying what human psychologists had identified as combat satisfaction. Admiral Kethvar, this is Admiral Chen commanding Terra Defense Force Battle Group Omega. We are requesting permission to engage enemy forces. Admiral Chen, we appreciate your arrival, but the tactical situation has deteriorated significantly. The swarm has adapted to counter every weapon system we possess. Perhaps your forces should remain in a support role while we attempt to develop new strategies. Chen's facial expression shifted in a way that made Kethvar's survival instincts activate. Admiral, with respect, we didn't travel 3 weeks through hyperspace to provide support. We came here to end this threat. Are there any friendly forces within 50,000 kilometers of the enemy formation? Kethvar checked his tactical display. Negative, Admiral. We withdrew to safe distance after losing 6 ships to their adaptive countermeasures. The swarm is currently in high orbit above Zarian Prime, processing the planet's remaining population centers. Understood. Battle Group Omega is moving to engagement range. I recommend your forces maintain current position and observe. The Galactic Admiral was about to protest when his sensor operator made a sound that was the Altarian equivalent of choking. Admiral, you need to see this. The human fleet composition is unprecedented. The tactical display updated to show the approaching human forces, and Kethvar felt his telepathic field spike with disbelief. What the humans had called a small task force consisted of over 800 vessels ranging from corvette-sized attack craft to battleships that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet. But the ship designs themselves defied every principle of military engineering he understood. Those vessels appear to have no standardization, his tactical officer observed. Each ship type uses completely different weapon systems, propulsion methods, and defensive configurations. How do they coordinate logistics for such diverse technologies? The answer became apparent as the human fleet reached firing range. Instead of forming elegant battle lines or sophisticated tactical formations, they simply accelerated directly toward the swarm in what appeared to be barely controlled chaos. Ships peeled off in random directions, each vessel or small group engaging different enemy units with weapons that seemed to change with every salvo. The lead human vessels are firing projectile weapons, the sensor operator reported with confusion. Kinetic impactors moving at significant fractions of light speed. The swarm is adapting their defensive matrices to deflect solid projectiles. Moments later, the same human ships switched to particle beam weapons that cut through the swarm's kinetic defenses like they didn't exist. Before the enemy could adapt to energy weapons, human torpedo boats unleashed swarms of guided missiles with warheads that seemed to change yield and composition mid-flight. They are changing weapon types faster than the swarm can process adaptations, Kethvar's tactical officer said with growing excitement. The enemy learning algorithms cannot keep pace with the rate of tactical modification. But it was the human capital ships that truly demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of chaos-based warfare. Massive dreadnoughts opened fire with weapons that defied classification. Exotic matter projectors, gravity manipulation devices, and what appeared to be controlled stellar plasma contained in magnetic fields. When swarm units began adapting to these exotic weapons, the human ships simply rammed their targets at significant fractions of light speed. Admiral Chen, Kethvar transmitted, your forces are taking significant casualties from ramming attacks. Those ships represent enormous resource investments. Chen's reply came through static-filled communications as her flagship engaged 3 swarm capital ships simultaneously. Admiral Kethvar, every human vessel in this fleet was built to be expendable. We don't fight to preserve our equipment. We fight to destroy our enemies. Resource efficiency is secondary to tactical effectiveness. As if to emphasize the point, a human destroyer deliberately flew into the hangar bay of a swarm carrier, detonating its fusion reactor inside the enemy vessel's hull. The resulting explosion took out both ships, but it also eliminated the carrier's entire drone complement before they could launch. This is insane, Kethvar's weapons officer protested. They are treating their own warships as ammunition. The battle's tide turned when the human fleet demonstrated their most devastating capability: coordinated unpredictability. Instead of following standard tactical doctrine, human ships operated in small groups that changed objectives, weapon types, and attack patterns every few minutes. Swarm adaptation algorithms that had proven capable of countering galactic fleets within hours simply couldn't process the constant tactical evolution. Human corvettes equipped with stealth systems appeared inside swarm formations, delivering nuclear weapons at point-blank range before the enemy could react. Missile cruisers fired projectiles that separated into smaller warheads, then separated again, creating weapon swarms that overwhelmed enemy defense systems through sheer volume. The swarm adaptation rate is decreasing, the sensor operator reported with growing amazement. Their processing capacity appears to be overloaded by the variety of attack types they are encountering. Admiral Chen's tactical approach became clear as the battle progressed. The humans weren't trying to destroy the swarm through superior firepower or advanced technology. They were deliberately feeding the enemy's adaptation systems more variables than could be processed simultaneously, causing systematic failures in the hive mind's coordination abilities. "All human vessels, this is Chen," the Admiral's voice broadcast across multiple communication channels. "Initiate Protocol Sledgehammer. I repeat, Protocol Sledgehammer is now active." What happened next would be remembered by galactic military historians as the most devastating tactical evolution ever witnessed. Every human ship in the fleet simultaneously changed its entire operational profile. Vessels that had been firing energy weapons switched to kinetic projectiles. Ships that had been operating as missile platforms became close combat raiders. The entire fleet's tactical identity shifted in minutes. The Vorthak swarm, their adaptation systems already straining to process the constant tactical changes, simply couldn't cope with a complete fleet-wide transformation. Hive mind coordination began breaking down as individual swarm units received contradictory adaptation instructions. Drone formations lost cohesion as their learning algorithms tried to counter weapon systems that had already changed again. "Their command structure is fragmenting," Kethvar's communications officer reported with disbelief. "The swarm units are operating independently now. They've lost collective coordination." Admiral Chen's flagship, a massive battle cruiser bristling with weapons that seemed to change configuration while Kethvar watched, closed with the largest swarm capital ship. Instead of engaging in a conventional gunnery duel, the human vessel latched onto its target with massive mechanical grapples and began boring through the enemy's hull with industrial cutting equipment. "What are they doing?" the tactical officer asked. The answer came as human boarding parties invaded the swarm vessel, not to capture it, but to plant nuclear charges throughout its interior structure. The human approach to ship-to-ship combat wasn't about elegant weapon exchanges or tactical superiority. It was about destroying enemies through direct, brutal, overwhelming force application. As the swarm capital ship exploded from within, the remaining enemy forces began retreating toward the system's edge. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished demonstrating human tactical doctrine. "All vessels," she broadcast, "pursue and destroy. No swarm unit leaves this system with operational capability." The human fleet broke into hunting groups that chased down fleeing enemies with relentless efficiency. Ships that had been damaged in the main battle were stripped of useful components, their crews transferring to intact vessels to continue the pursuit. The humans treated their own equipment as completely expendable resources in service of mission completion. "Admiral Chen," Kethvar transmitted, "the immediate threat has been neutralized. Perhaps we should allow the surviving swarm units to retreat and report this engagement to their leadership." Chen's reply came from a torpedo boat that was somehow keeping pace with fleeing swarm cruisers, despite being a tenth their size. Admiral, the swarm learns from every encounter. If we allow survivors to escape, they will adapt to counter our tactics and share that information with the rest of their forces. Standard human military doctrine is to ensure that adaptive enemies don't survive to adapt. The pursuit continued for 18 hours as human forces tracked down and destroyed every swarm vessel in the system. Ships, drones, automated mining equipment, even escape pods were systematically eliminated. When the last enemy signature disappeared from sensors, the human fleet regrouped around Zirion Prime and began rescue operations for the planet's surviving population. Admiral Chen, Kethvar transmitted, as his own forces moved to assist with humanitarian efforts, your tactical methods were effective. However, the level of casualties your forces sustained would be considered unacceptable by galactic military standards. Chen's damaged flagship limped toward the galactic fleet, its hull scarred by weapons impacts and ramming damage. Admiral Kethvar, human military doctrine considers any casualties acceptable if they achieve mission objectives. We didn't come here to preserve our equipment or minimize our losses. We came here to end the Vorthak threat. As the combined fleets began coordinating relief efforts for Zirion Prime, Admiral Kethvar received updated intelligence reports that made his telepathic field spike with alarm. The human task force represented less than 5% of Earth's total military capability. The Sol system's orbital shipyards were producing warships at a rate that exceeded the combined industrial output of 12 galactic civilizations. Admiral Chen, he transmitted, how many additional forces can humanity deploy if needed? The human admiral's response carried undertones that the translation system could only interpret as predatory satisfaction. Admiral, the Terra Defense Force consists of 47 full battle groups. What you witnessed today was a single unit operating under peacetime engagement protocols. If the swarm threat requires escalation, we can deploy forces that will make today's engagement look like a small-scale patrol action. Kethvar's four arms moved in patterns that indicated profound relief mixed with deep concern. The galactic community had sought help from a Deathworld species, expecting perhaps some tactical innovation and unconventional thinking. What they had received was access to a military force that treated the destruction of their own equipment as an acceptable tactical option, operated under engagement protocols that prioritized mission completion over casualty minimization, and possessed industrial capabilities that could sustain warfare on scales that dwarfed anything in galactic history. As news of the Zirion Prime engagement spread through swarm-controlled space, the enemy forces began experiencing something their hive mind had never processed before: strategic uncertainty. Their adaptation algorithms had been designed to counter known tactical patterns, not to cope with enemies that deliberately embraced chaos and unpredictability as core military doctrine. The Vorthak swarm had consumed worlds by adapting to overcome any resistance they encountered. They had never faced an enemy that considered adaptation itself to be a weakness to be exploited, or that possessed the industrial capacity to treat their own warships as expendable ammunition in service of victory. The galaxy's Deathworld species had descended with full fury unleashed, and the swarm was about to learn why natural selection on hostile worlds produced warriors that viewed overwhelming force as the most efficient solution to any problem.